Hello everybody, this is Heather the Bard here on this beautiful spring morning, and today I would like to talk about how to interpret a notated Irish tune for ornamentation. So if you're curious about some of the terminology I'm going to be using, you may want to pause and go visit my Ornamentation in Irish Music, a primer video, and that'll discuss all the terms and nuances that I'm going to be talking about in further detail here. So, how to interpret a tune. First of all, if you do not have your local session or local Irish music players to go learn from in person, your next bet is going to be notation. And there's a couple different things that you need to be aware of with that. First of all, as I've mentioned before, notation is just that one person's opinion on how that tune should sound and how it should look on the page. Lots of times there will be multiple different notated versions, and they're all a little bit different because how the person heard them was a little differently. The other thing to keep in mind is that Irish music is an oral tradition, meaning it is largely listened and heard via listening and learned via listening. And so if the only way you can learn Irish music is from the page, you need to be making sure to go listen to as much of it as you can. Either recordings, YouTube, radio, watching video performances of other skilled musicians. It's going to help you a lot, and it'll improve your game a lot. So today I have a notated version of Kesh Jig. I've seen about 5 or 6 different versions of Kesh Jig, and they're all pretty typical like this. So this one, we have some interesting things. So when you first look at a tune, there's 2 things that I like to look at first. And these are kind of your 2 basic rules of thumb. You look for long notes, and you look for repeated notes. When I say repeated notes, I mean figures like this. We have 2 notes that are the same and they're right next to each other. There's another set. So, long notes. You have a couple different options. Long notes, unless they're pretty much at the end of a phrase, you're probably going to want to do something with them. If you want to do something with them, you have a couple different options. The person who notated this version of Kesh Jig took the liberty of adding that little figure right there, and that is kind of the accepted sign for making that note into a roll, because it's the little swoopy figure. Your other option is going to be creating a triplet figure out of this note. And with a triplet figure, what that means is that you can either start on this note, go up, and then come back down to it, or you can start on it, go down, and then come back up. So I'm going to play this piece of music just exactly as written, plain Jane version. That was part A. Part B sounds like Irish music is organized into A and B parts, sometimes C and D, depending on how many sections they have, and each one is repeated. So it would be played A, B, B, etc., etc. So for how to look at this, we're looking at long notes here. They've already suggested that we can do a roll, and so that would mean that we have our lovely little long note, and rather than playing it as a nice fat long note, we would create a roll, and that would sound kind of like this. So that's other option is the triplet figure, as I've already mentioned. And if I'm going to create a triplet figure, I'll play it first if I go up, and we'll compare it to the next measure. See, they kind of sound similar, and they're kind of keeping the same feel. If I go down, it feels differently. So those are a couple things you can do with that. Now for the repeated notes, you'll want to separate them somehow. You can either tongue them to just separate them, and what that means is touching the tip of your tongue to the tip of your mouthpiece if you're playing a tin whistle, or if you're playing a fiddle, you bow each one, or if you play the mandolin, you pick each one. So they're just played just like that. But it's more typical to have them separated with either a cut or a strike. And so that is going to sound like those ones are, since they are so high, and especially on the tin whistle, I was just played those ones, because they're so high on the tin whistle, I can't really do a cut or, sorry, a tap on there. I can't go down with that note. It's more, feels better to go up with them. But on these ones, I might be able to go down and to have them sound a little differently then. So then that would be so that is a little bit different. So why are we doing this? That's the other thing. So when you are a listener of music, typically it's kind of accepted among performance professionals and entertainers that the human ear and brain doesn't have a very long attention span when listening to something. It's very easy, especially if the music is too repetitive, for your mind to wander off and start thinking about the to-do list and how your friend's dog was sick and everything else. The fun part about adding in ornamentation and the fact that Irish music has repeated sections is you can choose to do each repeat a little differently. And that serves the purpose of keeping you as a musician engaged, because we're also susceptible, if we're playing something exactly the same over and over and over again, such as for a dance, our mind will take off and our fingers will end up on autopilot. And it can happen frequently. And adding ornamentation in kind of keeps it a little interesting for us. And it keeps it interesting for the listener, so they remain engaged in the song that you're playing. Now what I like to do is I like to play each repeated section different. So I'll play it, usually I like to play it straight as written the first time. The next time through, I'll do it a little bit differently. And then, because the tunes are fairly short in comparison to a lot of other music that is more popular, I like to repeat the tune in its entirety a couple of times. And so then that gives me like 4 or 6 times through each section to do something a little different. And it almost can become a game that way. What can I do this time? How can I spice this up this time? And by doing that, alternating whether you're going to play it as it's notated or alternating your ornamentation to kind of give a little flair, you can kind of begin to shape the tune. Again, if you're listening a lot to a lot of different music, you'll very quickly develop an ear for Irish music as you listen to a bunch of different players, and you'll kind of start to pick up on the nuances of how, if I do it this way, it takes on this sort of feel, and if I do it this way, it takes on this other feel, and how to kind of make the tune start to speak and tell a story that way. So that is kind of the basic rules of thumb for how to look at a notated Irish tune and begin to add ornamentation into it. And the best part is to kind of sit down, get several different versions of the song, and compare them. Lots of times when I'm learning a song, I'll pull out like this version, and then I'll pull out the other versions that I have, and I'll sit down with them and I'll compare and go, okay, what does this look like in between? And that kind of gives me a little bit bigger toolbox to work with. Ornamentation is just a different toolbox. And by sitting down, you can kind of develop a plan for how you want to spice it up and what tools you want to take out of your toolbox. And that is kind of how it's done. Again, my name is Heather the Bard. If you've enjoyed these videos and find them valuable, if you love Irish music, if you want to support an independent music teacher, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/HeatherTheBard. Every little bit helps. It helps keep me making videos and helps me put my knowledge and be able to help spread my passion for this music with other people. No amount of giving is too small, honestly. And other than that, if you have questions, you can send me questions via the comments. You can find me on steemit.com/HeatherTheBard. You can also submit comments via my Patreon page as well. Or on Facebook, facebook.com/HeatherTheBard. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Happy playing.